Welcome. This is the visually impaired child in the classroom. I'm Nancy Moulton. I'm the program director for Education Services for Blind and Visually Impaired Children. Commonly we refer to ourselves as ESBVIC, and we are a program of Catholic Charities, Maine. So the goals for today are to develop an understanding of the implications of vision loss. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to try to minimize this window because it may be in the way. There we go. The goals for today are to understand the implications of vision loss, to understand how the teacher of visually impaired and the certified orientation mobility specialist can help, and to help you develop a perspective that things can be adapted. We just have to work together to figure out how best to do that for the students. So what you're going to need for the webinar, hopefully you have these ready, is a pair of glasses that you can use, spread Vaseline over. We'll use those later on. A container of coins and a map of Maine. The first thing I wanted to try, and as some of you may have guessed, I'm not an expert in using GoToMeeting or to the webinar, so we're going to hope this works okay. But we have a little video. It's just about a 6.5-minute video that it just gives some general tips about what you should or shouldn't do when you meet a blind person. So that's the first thing we're going to try right now. And hopefully it's a YouTube video, and hopefully people can see that. If you're having difficulty with that, please chat. I apologize, I had some video difficulties. I think we should be all set now. Please press *6 to mute your lines. Okay, I'm going to stop the video because I don't think it's working great. I'm going to ask everybody who's on the phone to please make sure you have pressed *6. That will mute your line so that the background conversations aren't heard. And then we will go back to the presentation, we hope, in just a second when we'll just keep going on the next slide. So at your convenience, this is going to be archived. So if you wanted to go back and look at that video, or you can just YouTube it, what to do when you meet a blind person. And it just gives some general tidbits, but we'll go over most of those later anyway. So who we are. So we are Education Services for Blind and Visually Impaired Children, as I said earlier, ESBVIC. We hold the contract through the state of Maine, the Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired, to provide TVIs to assist schools in the education of children who are visually impaired. There are 17 TVIs covering the entire state of Maine. We have an instructional materials center which houses Braille, large print, and other instructional materials needed by students with visual impairment, an administrative assistant, and the program director. So trying to figure out the system in Maine is somewhat difficult sometimes, so I'll try to go over that. The overarching area that we're under is the Maine Department of Labor, Commerce, Research, and Economic Development. So the Department of Labor, and under the Department of Labor is the Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, and within the Bureau of Rehab is the Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired. The Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired employs orientation mobility specialists, vocational rehabilitation counselors who specialize in working with those with visual impairment, and a blindness rehab specialist specializing in transition. Catholic Charities Maine employs all the teachers for the visually impaired, and we have the Instructional Material Center, and the IRIS Network currently holds a contract for rehabilitation, community rehabilitation services for those over 14, and they also have a rehab center program. So who does what? As I said, we have all the TVIs throughout the state. We have a contract with the Division for the Blind, so there's no cost to the local schools. All referrals for services come through Catholic Charities Maine. So if you have a student who you suspect has a visual impairment, then you would make that referral to Catholic Charities. We would then collect what we need for paperwork, and then if that student needs other services, and we would be sharing that information with the Division for the Blind. So if you have questions or concerns about TVI services, about the teachers for the visually impaired, then your contact would be myself. So it's Nancy Moulton and nmoulton@ccmaine.org. The Division for the Blind provides the certified orientation mobility specialists, and they work with people of all ages, including students. They also provide the voc rehab services to students 14 and older. If you have questions or concerns about these services, then you would contact Samantha Fenderson, samantha.j.fenderson@maine.gov. She's actually the liaison to our program, so she is the Southern Maine supervisor, but she can push you in contact with the person you'd need to reach. So I thought it best to just leave one contact for the Division for the Blind, and that would be Sam. So our services, we serve children from birth to 20 in their educational environment, wherever that is. If they are babies, it may be at home, it could be at their daycare, it could be at school. We also serve students who are homeschooled, so we provide that service wherever they are. Referrals should come through the IEP process. They should be listed on the IEP or 504 plan, and we may provide direct and or consultative services to students with a documented visual impairment. So the referrals. The application and the releases can be found on our website, and I put the link into the presentation. In order to determine what services a student might need, before we can even do an assessment, we really need an eye doctor's report. So the application, if you have the eye doctor's report, it would be great if that were sent with it. If not, there'll be releases included with the application. We're happy to send for that report. We just need schools to realize that we can't take action until we have the eye doctor's report because it's part of our assessment process. So if you would just know that that could affect your timeline, that we do have to wait for that report. We get them usually pretty quickly, but that's what we need. If there's evidence of a visual impairment, when we review that eye report and the application, if we see evidence of a visual impairment, which is typically vision that is worse than 20/60 or 70 or worse, or restricted field, or a specific, a diagnosed visual impairment, then we will proceed and then we will assign a teacher for visually impaired to do a functional vision assessment. Things that I can tell you that don't, typically qualify a student in and of themselves would be things like an esotropia or an amblyopia. Those aren't actual diagnosis of eye conditions. They're more, there's something that can often be surgically remedied, or the eye doctor is medically treating the student for that. We're looking at students who have a diagnosis of a vision impairment. Their vision is usually, as I said, worse than 20/70, and we're looking at how can we help that student succeed educationally. If we don't see evidence, then what happens is we will then call the school and try to get more information, because sometimes it's just that that there might be more going on than we see initially. So we'll call and check to see what information you can provide. So when we do the functional vision, we provide assessments to determine the implications of vision loss for each particular child. We may then provide either direct instruction or consultation, depending on the needs, and assist the team in determining what the appropriate accommodations and modifications as necessary. So the types of assessments we might do are functional vision assessments, learning media assessments, and expanded core curriculum assessments. And I'll talk in a few minutes about the expanded core curriculum and what that means. The functional vision assessment, we use the eye doctor report, and we work with a child to determine what's their functional use of vision and the implications of that vision impairment. Typically, it's done in the educational environment, wherever the child is. It consists of informal observations along with specific assessments, tasks geared to determining how the child is using their vision. We consider the effects of lighting, print size, complexity of material, working distance, etc., to make recommendations to the team for any accommodations or modifications of services the student might need. Students with multiple challenges. When evaluating students with multiple challenges, we utilize a variety of familiar and unfamiliar materials to provide the team with information regarding how the child uses their vision and strategies for instruction. I'm just going to check the chat box here for a second and make sure we aren't having any questions. I think we're good. The next type of assessment we do is a learning media assessment. That's used to determine the most appropriate learning media for the child. So whether it's regular print, large print, Braille, auditory, and sometimes a combination of those. So we'll take a look and see what works best for that student. We assess the impact of the student's visual impairment and how they learn. Look at whether the eye condition is stable, how the child accesses his or her environment, the speed, the efficiency of the current mode of reading, etc. We'll use this to help answer the question on the IEP that considers the need for Braille. So on your IEP forms, I'm sure all of you know that there is a specific question is, does the student have a visual impairment and has Braille been considered? It's part of Maine law that we must consider Braille for every student who's visually impaired. Often, we can look to that learning media assessment or the functional vision assessment or both and say this student is doing very well with print or with other electronic devices to access print, and their vision is stable and they don't need to use Braille. But we do always need to make that consideration. So the IEP, after the assessments are complete, we present our findings to the IEP team. We provide recommendations to the team to help determine the level of student needed by the student. It's essential we be invited to the IEP meeting. The more notice we have, the more likely it is that we can participate. And I know everybody has busy schedules, but given the fact that TVIs are often covering very large geographic areas, and they have a number of students who have regular service identified in their IEP, it sometimes becomes a scheduling challenge. So the more notice the TVI has, certainly the easier it is to accommodate the meeting in the schedule. Okay, so we're ready for the first activities. So hopefully you all have a pair of glasses. Any type of glasses will do, and you have some Vaseline or something that you can coat the lens with. And the first thing I'd like you to do is take a look at your map of Maine. And I want you to try to locate the following. Now I'm going to list a few different places. I don't even know how to pronounce the first one. It's Onawa, O-N-A-W-A, Waterville, Portland, Porter, and Grove. So really, if you just pick two of those, if that were too many, pick, you know, Portland or Waterville, because those are bigger cities, and then try to find one of the smaller ones that you might not be as familiar with. And see how you do trying to find those places with your simulators, which is what your glasses smeared with Vaseline are loosely being called vision simulators here. And I'll give you about a minute for that. Okay, the minute's up. And just so you know, it's always a struggle for me to sit quietly for 1 minute and just wait. And that's something that we all have to be thinking about a lot of times when we're working with students is, you know, we can just keep going on, and we need to give, you know, some wait time to let them figure out what they're trying to do. So I want you to notice the difference between the bolded cities and the smaller towns. Notice the difference when you have an idea of where a place is as to when you don't. Notice how much fun it is to try to find on those tiny keys that are, unless you have a very large map, the key is always in such very small print. It makes it really difficult. So those are the kinds of things that it's just to help you develop a little bit of an awareness as some of the challenges that the students may face in trying to access materials with a visual impairment. So now we're going to talk about some general tips. And some of these were covered in the video, and I apologize that didn't go as well as I'd hoped. So we'll talk about the general tips. And my first one that I say over and over and over again is to set high expectations. A student may have a visual impairment, but they certainly have all kinds of other abilities, and we want to make sure that we're setting high expectations for them. When you're working with a student with a visual impairment, use the same language you use every day with everyone else. It's fine to use the words look and see. And actually, if you try not using those words, it really stilts your conversation. You start tripping over your words. So go ahead and use look and see. When you're working with a student who's visually impaired, identify yourself when speaking and use their name so that you know that you're talking to them. So whenever I've worked with students, and it may be a student I've worked with for years, I would always approach them by saying, "Hi Susie, it's Nancy." And I do that so she knows that I'm talking to her and she knows that it's me. Now, am I very sure in many, many instances that those students knew my name, they knew my voice very, very well and could identify it without any trouble? Yes, no doubt. But if I relate this to the experience that probably most of you have had, I certainly have had on multiple times, is when the phone rings, I pick up the phone and someone's talking on the other end and I know I should know who it is. And I spend more time trying to figure out who it is rather than listening to what they're saying. So 99 out of 100 times that student might know that it was me, But that 1 out of 100 times, I don't really want to give that up to a guessing game. Speaking of guessing games, I find it, for me personally, I have a really difficult time when people play guessing games in the hallway like, "Oh, Johnny, do you know who this is? Can you guess?" I guess personally I find it disrespectful. I have issues with that. It's not a guessing game. It's they need the information, who's talking to them, and then you can actually have a meaningful conversation. Another general tip is to, when you give directions, use specifics such as by the window, to the right, not just over there. So the expanded core curriculum. The expanded core curriculum is made up of 9 disability-specific skills that people with visual impairment need to develop for success. So the 9 areas are social interaction skills, compensatory or functional academic skills, including communication modes, and that also includes Braille, orientation and mobility, independent living skills, recreation and leisure, career education, use of assistive technology, sensory efficiency skills, and self-determination. So social skills. Our students are often the only student with a visual impairment in their school. So that's important for you to know. We really want to develop peer groups. So sometimes you'll find that the teachers for visually impaired or the O&M instructor specialist will have outings where we'll gather some students from varying areas and get them together and do field trips or community experiences, and we're developing that peer group for them. But within their school, they're often the only student. Don't treat them as though they are a movie star. A lot of times our students will come through the hallway and 7 people will walk by them and 7 people will interrupt what they're doing, and so we certainly, every student is special, every kid is special, and so are those with visual impairment. We need to provide our students direct instruction in social skills, as a majority of the information gained about social interactions is done visually from a distance. If you think about how much nonverbal communication happens throughout the day, our students won't see people rolling their eyes if they're saying something that might not be appropriate for the situation. Our students sometimes will tend to get a little bit too close and need some strategies to kind of measure the appropriate distance, appropriate body space. So another tip is when doing group work, it's really best for the student with visual impairment for the teacher to assign the groups. If you're thinking about a class group activity, when you say to the class, okay, well in a minute we're going to get together into groups and each group is going to have a different state and you're going to need to research, the most common occupations in that state. Before you ever finish your directions, the students have looked across the room to one another, nodded their heads, saying non-verbally, do you want to work together? Whereas our student wouldn't have the opportunity to do that. So it really is so much easier for our student if you can group them, and you can do it in a variety of ways. That certainly takes out that part of the equation. High expectations are essential. When doing group work, a lot of times I've seen a lot of teachers assign jobs. Our students can have jobs. They can be note takers. They can be researchers. They can do all kinds of things. So we'll talk a little bit about Braille Learners. I should alert you that Braille Learners are not the majority of our caseloads. So of the teachers' caseloads, The average caseload probably ranges somewhere around 20. It can be a little less, it can be a little more. And on that caseload, there may be no Braille readers, or there may be one or two. Rarely there's three, but it happens. So it's a small number of students who are academic Braille learners. But those Braille learners take up a significant portion of time from a teacher visually impaired, because there's an awful lot of skills that we need to make sure those students get. Braille's a complex code. We begin teaching tactual skills at an early age. We're not necessarily teaching the Braille code when they're a year old, but we certainly are getting kids going with those hands and getting them exploring tactually. Students need direct exposure to Braille rather than incidental exposure to print that those with typical vision have every day. So when you think about little babies who know when they're going to McDonald's, when they're 3 or 4 years old, that's because they've driven by those golden arches. It's not that they can actually read McDonald's. So, we begin immersing kids in the world of print when they're very, very young, and we need to do that with students who are going to be Braille learners when they're really young as well. Some of the considerations that as school districts you need to be thinking about is that much of the students' Braille is produced at the local level. So worksheets and daily work and assignments are produced at the local school. Catholic Charities and the Instructional Materials Center, we can assist schools in getting textbooks. Can I ask people to make sure they've hit *6, because we're getting some feedback. So we can assist in getting textbooks, but in terms of classroom materials, the school is responsible for producing those. We certainly can help train the ed tech, but the ed tech needs to know the Braille code. They need to be able to adjust for formatting. They need to be able to proofread the Braille to make sure the Braille is going in the right direction. These are things that are essential for the student. So in the production piece, much of it will be produced electronically. So you'll need specialized software for that and a Braille embosser. I think the key fact here is the TVIs will help you through this. If you have a Braille learner, don't worry, we will help you with this, but that it is ultimately the school's responsibility to provide that. If an ed tech is needed for the student, they should be encouraged to step back whenever possible. The biggest downfall for our students is that they often build relationships with adults but can struggle with peer relationships. So it's really important to try to foster those peer relationships with other students. This is a handout that many of the teachers use. It's called 19 Ways to Step Back. And it talks about ways that you can kind of step back and allow the student to move forward, essentially, so that you're always trying to foster independence. When I waited a minute earlier, I wanted you to think about how long a minute is. When students might need a little bit of assistance to start a zipper or something like that, but then they should be able to finish. We need to continually monitor our students' skills and always make sure we're just raising the bar a little bit at a time. So I'm not suggesting that we withdraw all assistance to students. I'm saying it's really important to help students build success, let them struggle a little bit, and that's just building their skills and self-esteem and independence. So these are 19 ways. I'm not going to read each and every one. I like the one where it says, let your students make mistakes and get into trouble. It's part of the human experience. One of my favorite stories of that was the student that I had who was, I believe, in the 4th grade, and she came to work with me, and she came in pretty excited to tell me that she had just gotten a detention. And I said, oh, and why did you get a detention? And she said, oh, well, I didn't do my homework. And I said, oh, well, then I guess that's what happens. And she was just so excited. About an hour, or maybe it was a little longer than that, but later on the same day, I heard her grumbling to her classmates, oh, I got a detention. And it made me smile because I thought to myself, this is a kid who, my perception was, she was excited that she was treated just like everybody else. And she caught on very quickly she wasn't supposed to be excited about getting that detention. But you know, we need our students to be held to the same standards that all of our other students are. Every time you give students, your job as an ed tech, if you're assisting a student, is really to give them access to their environment, not to teach them, not to hold their hand, but to give them access to what they wouldn't be able to access, and maybe to help interpret some things for them. But really, the more you can step back and let them figure things out, the better off they'll be. The other thing I want you to remember as is that if I don't know who's on this webinar today, but the teacher is the student's teacher, and an ed tech is there to assist. And so we always want that teacher to maintain that responsibility for the student. They are another student among many in their classroom, and the ed tech is there to help, but we want that primary responsibility to be to the teacher. We want our students handing their work in to the teacher. So those are the things that are important. If you have a Braille reader, you may probably see a Braille Writer. Just so you know, Braille Writer has 6 center keys that represent the 6 dots of the Braille cell, and there's a backspace, a line space, and a space bar. And I just love this picture, so I put it in. And because the student is just making this cute little face as he's, you know, brailing, and it takes a fair amount of strength to use a Braille Writer. So. But we teach more than just the Braille code. So students who may be Braille readers are not just learning Braille. We're teaching keyboarding skills or abacus, interpretation of tactile graphics, including maps, diagrams, and all kinds of other skills that they need, auditory skills. All of those things we're teaching as students are going through school. I'll keep going, but I do believe we have an orientation mobility specialist who is on the webinar with me. So if there are questions, we'll put them in the chat and she can address those at the end. But so even though the orientation mobility specialists and the TDIs don't work for the same agency, we certainly do work together. But let's talk about O&M. It stands for Orientation Mobility. So orientation is the knowledge of where you are, where you want to go in relation to other people, places, and things. For example, I feel the tile floor under my feet. I hear the dishwasher running in front of me. I must be in the kitchen. I want to go outside, and I know I have to walk through the kitchen to get to the back door and go outside. So that's what orientation. Mobility is actually movement through space in a safe, efficient, and graceful manner. It's not simply about walking alone, but getting the body from point A to point B, irrespective of the means of getting there. So it can be facilitated by human guide, which I'm just going to interject here. The mobility instructor can certainly show you, so that if you have a student and you need to get them somewhere, we can show you human guide, or using a tool, a long cane, a wheelchair, a stroller, a walker, a dog guide, etc. So if the student asks to go to the bathroom, they have to figure out they have to walk with their cane through the classroom, out the door, turn left, down the hallway to the bathroom. That's how I'm mobile in a safe, efficient, and graceful manner. O&M helps children learn about and interact with the world around them. It's a crucial service that supports children grow into independent adults. And I'm just going to put a plug in for the orientation mobility specialists. When I've worked with them in the past, they've always asked that we make the request that if an orientation mobility specialist is working with a child in a hallway, not to interrupt. That's their classroom. They're teaching and they're working with a student. So it's really important that the student be able to concentrate on where they're going and participate in the lesson. So that's my 2 cents about instruction for O&M. So the legal implications, IDEA, O&M is specifically listed in IDEA and therefore in MUSER as a related service. It will require appropriate assessment, planning, and instruction. It should be done by a certified orientation mobility specialist. And services and accommodations and materials need to be listed in the IEP or 504 plan. So O&M, in familiar places, a person might function normally, but in specific situations, they might need O&M services. They can be provided in the natural environment, the home, the school, the community. The services are client, family focused, but they are part of the team. They're part of the IEP team, and that includes parents, family, teachers, and other service providers. So the white cane. The white cane is a tool. There are different kinds, different tips. It's not called a stick. It assists with locating things at a distance. It assists with exploring and previewing the area around the person. Provides tactile and auditory feedback about the environment. Protects the lower half of the body. Allows a person to continue traveling when they're experiencing vision issues. It can provide extra reaction time before reaching a danger. Used as identification for a person as being visually impaired, and there's no age requirement to use a cane. Independent living skills. Direct teaching of skills such as tying shoes, matching clothes, making a snack, money management. As teachers for the visually impaired, we're working on independent living skills from the time kids are really itty-bitty, putting on their coat, zipping their coat. We are doing that based on age-appropriate and student-appropriate goals, and those should be included in the IEP because they're essential. They're essential in that functional skills section. Sensory efficiency skills. We might use specialized equipment such as video magnifiers, and those come in all shapes and sizes. The one in this photograph is quite old, but there are all kinds of new ones, and some will work at a distance, and some are more portable now. So there's all types of devices out there, but our students need to learn to use them efficiently. I've had one student who, when she used her video magnifier, she moved material across that screen so quickly, I wasn't able to do it. I couldn't maintain concentration on that. It would give me a headache quickly, but she had no trouble at all, and that's how she accessed her materials. So, but she learned that over time. It was a skill that was developed. Our students need to learn to use their vision, but also their other senses efficiently. Their listening skills isn't something you're necessarily born with. It's something you develop, particularly as our students begin to use audio materials for technical materials. So when you're getting not just listening to a novel, but actually trying to listen to materials that you're trying to gain facts from. You know, it's really a skill. Okay, we're ready for the second activity here. So this one, hopefully you have a little bucket of coins with you, and it certainly doesn't matter whether you close your eyes or put on a blindfold, whatever is easier for you. Hopefully you have the container of mixed coins. You can dump that on the table in front of you and start sorting the coins. Get them into the different values, and again, I'll give you 1 minute. Okay. So think about, first of all, the question is, how good are your tactile skills? Some people can do that pretty easily, some people not so much. After completing that, I want you to think about what would have made it easier. I would suggest maybe having some small containers to put the coins in might have been a little easier. Using a tray or a placemat so all the coins kind of were in a localized space, and then you could sort them into different containers. You know, there are certain things as we look at, and that's just a very simple, straightforward task, but as we start, the TVI will start doing some consultation with you. We'll come up with probably some very simple accommodations that you can make. And in some cases, you'll find that there'll be an accommodation that everybody can benefit from. So we're always looking to try to do that. Recreation and leisure. Recreation and leisure needs to be taught directly to students with visual impairment. They don't have that distance vision sometimes in order to see, you know, some of the sports, what they are and what they do. The photos in this slide is students who went down to a bowling alley, and the orientation mobility specialist is showing them what happened to the pins, where the ball goes, and then how the pins are reset. All of those things, students wouldn't get that information incidentally. They wouldn't know what bowling was necessarily if you didn't take them bowling and let them bowl. So that's one more thing that we do. Assistive technology. Boy, these days there's all kinds of assistive technology, and different pieces of equipment for different needs. I think the key is to begin with an assistive technology eval by someone who's knowledgeable about visually impaired, about those devices that are up and coming for the visually impaired. They use a wide range of assistive technology. In this photo, the first picture is a student who has a laptop in front of her, and her TVI has an iPad with her, so they're using both of those tools. In the middle picture, we have a student who's using a handheld CCTV, so that's magnifying the print on the page so that she can see that. And in the last slide, it's a student who's using a Braille note taker with a Braille embosser. I think it's key to know that if the technology is needed in school, it's likely that it's needed at home. Self-determination and career exploration. So students, you know, when we think about self-determination, it's students really recognizing what are their strengths and weaknesses, self-advocacy, and then career exploration. Those things all need to be facilitated or taught by the TVI. You know, we need to be thinking about, and we're often working with students and thinking about what are the kinds of things you're interested in, and what accommodations could be made for your vision impairment. Career exploration. So as I said earlier, we often between the TVI and the orientation mobility specialist, we will take students out into the community and hopefully with other students, and we do things like going to the rescue squad, and these students had a day where they learned about first aid, and then they also got to ride in an ambulance, and while doing that they learned all kinds of things, including what are some of the careers that are involved, things like what's a dispatcher and that type of thing. So the TVIs will assist you with adaptations, modifications of classroom environment and the curriculum. So we'll help you figure it out. It's going to be a bit of an adventure. You just will figure things out together, and you know, to best meet the students' needs. There are many items that can be acquired that have already been modified to meet the visual needs, the needs of students with visual impairment. So there are, the middle slide is a periodic table that's, you know, tactual. It's in Braille and large print. There are feel and peel little stickers that have the basic math symbols. There's large print atlases. There's all kinds of things that are already done. So we can help access those things that are already out there. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. On the other hand, there are some that will adapt on our own. So like classroom chart with the students, or a word wall we may make for the students, that if their classmates have a word wall, then we can make one for them. Making tactile drawings. So there's all kinds of things that we can help to modify for the student. We do have an Instructional Material Center, as I said earlier. We have an inventory of Braille and large print books. What happens is we need to get book orders in the early spring. We need our book orders. Actually, we need to be thinking about what books a student is going to use. We start that process in January, February. We're getting schools to be thinking about what are the books the student's going to need next year. Because if a book needs to be produced for the first time, so if it's not already been produced, it can take many months to get that book. So it can take upwards of 6 months if it's in Braille. And the thing is, if you have a Braille learner, you'll learn more about this, but on January 4th of 2016, we just made a transition from the Braille that we've used for many, many years to some fairly small changes in it, but it's now it's called UEB, the Unified English Braille Code. But things need to be produced differently. So if we are looking at production time, it can take a long time. So the first thing we do is we'll help figure out whether books are available or not. And if we already have them in state, then that's easy. We would loan that out. If we don't have it in state, we're going to look to find out if it's available through the American Printing House for the Blind. Because if it is, it's probable that it will be at no cost to the school. We have a certain amount of federal quota money that we are allowed to use for Braille and large print materials, and as long as we have those funds, we are able to provide those materials at no cost to the school. There are some books that are available, but the school is going to need to purchase those books. And I will warn you that they can be very expensive. So often what will happen is a school will purchase the book, they will use the book, and then they will send it back to our Instructional Material Center, and we'll house it in case another student should come up that would need it from another school district. They wouldn't have to buy it. Braille can take up a lot of space. So if you have used a Braille book and you know that there are missing volumes, that book essentially isn't any good unless we have all the volumes. So if we're going to house that at an Instructional Material Center, we need to have all of the volumes. Some resources. There are tons of resources, and your first resource is your TVI or your O&M specialist. Those, the people on the ground, are the people who can help you best. But there's lots of great stuff on some websites too. Perkins has lots of webinars on different things, so you certainly, I would suggest going to that. And pathstoliteracy.org is another website that has great resources and ideas on there. So, staff training and consultation. Today was just the beginning. We're going to provide you information as you begin this journey throughout the school year. Our teachers can help you. We'll do in-services with your staff. We'll help the kids in any way we can. So the key factor is collaboration. We want to collaborate with you. We will do everything we can to help you make this a successful experience for the student and for yourselves. It's important for the TVI to consult with classroom teachers throughout the year. So I want you to know that it's great to get started, but remember you want to keep in touch, because as things come up in the curriculum, you won't know what you won't know, and so if you may think, I can't adapt that, I can't figure out how I do it, where the TVI may very well have an idea for you that will just expand your horizons. So please, keep good communication. We will help assist in training the ed tech to teach Braille and can provide resources to help them do that as well. But they're going to need the time to do that, and that's the tricky part. So now what? We're the resource. We'll help you determine what equipment you need, what resources you need. But if you have questions, please ask your TVI and your O&M specialist. If you don't know who that is, then be in touch with the case manager. They should know who it is. And if not, they can contact me, or you can contact me and I can help figure it out. So my contact information is here. It's Nancy Moulton, nmoulton@ccmaine.org. And my phone number is, the office is 299-1936. I do have a cell phone. It's 592-4760. So if there are any questions, I am happy to entertain those now. You can unmute your line if you'd like, if you just want to ask a question. That's fine, if that's easier. Well, I'm not hearing any questions. I will say that if you had previously registered and you need a certificate of attendance, my administrative assistant is happy to email that to you. Her email address is shayne, SHAYNE, @ccmaine.org. Or you can call that office number, and she'll get that certificate out to you. All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day.